you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, great. I'm in Edinburgh and you're in San Diego, right?
I am. Yes, it's beautiful, sunny, like usual. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, the sun's just come out as well, so I'm really excited. My friend's visiting from New York, so then we're going to go for a walk and wander around town later as well.
Oh,
And yeah, I'm really excited to hop onto this call and get started with you too about, like everything that we want to talk about, which is about helping to calm the nervous system to
yeah.
create the soothing sanctuaries that the highly sensitive community and everyone basically needs, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's such a necessity. And I know for a while I kind of was under the impression that it was superfluous. It was sort of just this like extra
Yeah.
thing to have like a beautiful space or a soothing space. And it was surface. It didn't matter deeply. And I, since then, have learned that that is absolutely not the case, and how foundational it is really to our mental health, our relational health with our spouses, our partners, our kids. So I'm really,
Absolutely. It's like that anchor, right? And it's what we were talking about last time when we had our conversation as well. It's not the surface level tiding or, like that. We're not going for that kind of angle. And then we were talking about why it's so important for the highly sensitive community as well, like in particular, the KonMari method. And I see Tidy Milso here as well. Hi, thank you so much. She's also a KonMari consultant as well. So I'm so happy to see her here. And, I think just to get started, like for people who aren't familiar with the highly sensitive community or what KonMari is, like I was thinking, like, why don't we just start off with some myth busters? I'm sure these are some things that you hear really often about, it's not about shyness, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It is,
Yeah.
yeah. So I can start. So for those who don't know, HSP stands for highly sensitive person. And this was a term that a researcher, a psychologist named Dr. Elaine Aron coined, I want to say it was back in the 90s. And one of the myths that comes around a lot, and I actually see it pop up even on highly sensitive person, centric Instagram pages, is that being a highly sensitive person is a disorder or a diagnosis, or a lot of people think, and I don't agree with this, so maybe other people think this too, but that it is part of the autism spectrum, or that it overlaps with, or that it's sort of part of like ADHD, or that it's kind of should be considered one of these diagnoses. And I think the research is pretty strong that it's simply just a collection of traits that is it's evolutionarily conserved, meaning that it's beneficial to the humanity to have people who are highly sensitive, because we kind of are visionaries. We can see nuances that other people can't see. We have empathy. We can kind of see what is for the greater good. So in terms of leadership and forward thinking and just being democratic and considering the needs of everybody.
Yes.
It's really a wonderful skill, a trait that we bring to our communities and to ourselves.
Absolutely. And you're able to think and process more deeply as well. And so, that could also have the drawback, which is that you get overstimulated very, very easily too. So it is a type of neurodivergency, isn't it?
Yeah. I consider it that. I think that language is newer, like it wasn't around when HSP was first discovered, but I absolutely consider it, along with autism spectrum and ADHD and other, similar things, part of neurodivergency. And I don't even know that those things should be considered, disorders so much as just, hey, our brains work differently. How can we work with how can we manage, and for HSP as you named it, how can we manage the parts of it that are difficult or that like don't mesh well with the world that we live in? And overstimulation is the main one for most HSPs, and how do we leverage the gifts and the skills that we can bring for any type of work.
Absolutely. And I think that's so beautiful, like how you portray it, because one of the things that I learned, like being an HSP mom, and you are one as well, and I'm also raising like 2 HSP children too, is that like your sensitivity can be strengthened, but because we live in a society where HSPs are about 20%, would you say?
Yes,
of population? So like, we're living in a world where it's catering to the 80%.
Yes, absolutely. And I think especially in more industrialized countries, like I'm in San Diego, and
Yeah.
we have giant, like 10, 12 lane freeways.
Oh
And
my
it's like
gosh, yes.
so billboards everywhere. It's like so much intensity that I think
Yeah.
people who are not HSPs might just sort of be like, da, 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 and like not, just think of it as part of the
Yeah.
background. But for my brain, it's like, oh, like there's just, it's all stimulation
Totally.
at me.
Yes.
Yeah, and it adds up. So.
And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because for my first ever driving lesson, the instructor took me out on a LA freeway.
Oh,
Like, and it's like coming from someone who has like never driven a car before,
that's
So I was like,
horrifying.
oh my gosh. Yeah. And then now looking back, because I really shamed myself
Oh,
at that time. And I was like, oh, okay, now I see it. I was like, you know what? Like that guy just wasn't the right instructor for me,
absolutely.
Yeah.
What a great reframe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like, I love this, because it's like what you're saying is, we get to celebrate our uniqueness as well. And like, to bring it into the KonMari realm is that, like, if we're talking about myths, like one of the things that I get very often is people are always, they think that KonMari is minimalism.
Mm-hmm.
And they also think that it means that you can only have a set amount, or you have to have a certain look as well. But what we're actually doing, the method actually celebrates uniqueness. So if you're a maximalist and you absolutely love everything that you have in your home, like genuinely, then that's what sparks joy for you, right? And just because Marie Kondo, she has that minimalist look, that doesn't mean that you have to embrace that aesthetic. But a lot of people, like, it's like, you get those clickbait. So people are like, oh yeah, she says that you can only have 10 books. And it's like, actually, that's so not true at all, right? Yeah. And so like people were like, rag on that. But it's like, no, that's not true at all. Like if you like, you just do what works for you. And I think especially for people who are HSPs and empaths as well, when I approach the KonMari method with clients, I use that as a self-awareness tool. Because we all know that gratitude is good for you. We all know that letting go is good for you. But just like having to go to the gym, if you don't actually work out, if you don't actually step into the gym, you're not actually practicing it. Like knowing and doing are two different things. Whereas like, our homes, I reframe it as like our home is that training ground where we get to practice letting go. We get to practice gratitude as well.
Yeah.
And then and then it's really about like honoring what works for you. So you also develop confidence because you practice saying yes to the things that light you up, and you practice saying no with gratitude for the things that don't serve you. And I think especially as like, people who are highly sensitive, we're constantly, like bending over backwards to try to fit into this world.
Yeah.
It's so challenging. And then you're made to feel like the weirdo,
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like that whole thing about like, okay, like, especially let's say, for example, like going to concerts, right? Like that, like people are like, oh yeah, you're supposed to love going to concerts and festivals and stuff. But like from a young age, I was just like, no, that's not my thing.
Yeah.
But you kind of like force yourself to like fit into that mold as well. And then I think now when especially as I'm raising two young children who are highly sensitive, it's all about giving them that confidence so that they can say no with ease to the things that don't serve them, right? And it starts from being able to practice with our own belongings. So when we do it the KonMari way, we're always starting with what brings you joy. So we're not coming from that scarcity mindset, because and it's interesting because you're a psychotherapist yourself too. It's like when we start by choosing positively, then people feel at ease, right? They're not like, they don't get their defense mechanisms up. So that's also why the method isn't about like, oh, you can only have 5 t-shirts, Yeah. So we start from like, oh, choose your favorite things, and then you feel relaxed, and then you're like, oh, okay, like those other things, they don't necessarily compare. You're like, oh, I can let go of those so much easier just simply because I have these things. These are like my Hall of Fame items, right?
Yeah.
So then you're not starting from like, oh, what do you want to get rid of? You're starting from what do you want to keep? And then And it's like with children as well. Like I often say, like, you know, with children or people who have challenges letting go, then it just gives them, we have to just hold space. Like, so that's also another myth that I want to bust as well, which is, you know, sometimes when I'm working with clients, like the partners will be like, oh my gosh, Rebecca's coming. Is she going to, you know, make me throw away everything? I'm like, no, that's not the method at all. Like I'm there to guide. I'm like a personal trainer, basically. I'm not going to do the workout for you, you know, like I'll be there to like guide you. But
Yeah.
like you have to do the work. You have to make the choices. I'll have clients who will be like, how does this look? What do you think about this? And I'm like, no, you go and look in the mirror yourself, and then how does it make you feel?
Oh, it's well so empowering to approach it that way.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, you know, how people, I think people are influenced by media around psychotherapy and probably these, I was thinking of the show What Not to Wear. I don't know
Yeah.
if you ever watched that back in the
Yeah.
day, but they were like so mean. They'd be like, no, this old thing that goes, it's going in
Yeah.
the trash. And someone would be like crying, like, no, that's like, it's so sentimental. And they'd be like, it's too ugly,
Yeah.
too bad. Like, it was just so harsh. And in the long
Absolutely.
run, it's really not teaching anyone anything. So I
Yeah.
love how there's so many parallels really between the work that you do
Yes.
and the work that I do as a therapist and a coach. Um, and I think that the biggest one that I'm hearing is teaching people to honor. That's
Yeah.
I'm like all about that word right now. To honor what they are really needing. So
Yes.
whether that's like a sensation, whether that's like just a deep inner knowing
Yeah.
of here's what I want,
Yeah.
or my body is just saying no
Yeah.
to, you know, this person or this situation,
Yeah.
or adding this to my schedule. But you're absolutely right that a lot of HSPs, and I am like this actually with my belongings too, now that I think about it to some degree, where I'm like, oh, look, I don't want to disappoint that person, or like,
Yes.
oh, but I do like this. Like, it's not as important, but I do like it. And it's hard for me to let go because I kind of
Yeah.
have this emotional attachment that comes up, even though part of me deep down knows this doesn't need to be part of my life right
Yes.
now. But
Yeah. And it's all
to
about
honor that.
honoring,
Yeah.
you know, because I always say, like, okay, if it feels a little bit sticky and a little bit tricky, it's okay. Like, keep it with confidence, or we let it go. So if you're not able to let it go, that's totally cool too.
Right.
Keep it, because it's also, you know, as humans, we keep on evolving, we keep on changing. So something that served you 3 months ago might not serve you now.
Yeah.
So we always do, in KonMari speak, we always do the joy checking. So joy checking is the maintenance. Like tidying festival is when you do the foundational work.
I love that
And
it's called
then the
festival. I've never heard that language before.
Yeah.
But it's
And
so
language matters, right?
and
Language
celebratory.
matters. Yes. And so like in Japanese, it's a direct translation from Japanese. So it's katatsuke matsuri. So that's literally tidying festival, because again, there's a lot of positive psychology infused in it. So she wants it to be something that you look forward to. You know, it's like typically people are like, oh, decluttering, having to like, you know, tidy up, all that kind of stuff. They have an aversion to it, but it's also it is deep rooted, because, you know, we might have had really negative experiences growing up. Like, you know, you might have been yelled at to tidy up, right? Like, or you might have come home from school one day and like all of your belongings had been like, you know, like someone had thrown away your belongings, right?
Yeah. Or it's daunting to make some of those changes too, right? With when you're looking at like something that is really cluttered, or that you know you haven't dealt with in a long time, there's just, at least for me, there's sometimes this sort of psychological burden of like, how long is this going to take? And super messy.
And I love that you're bringing up that time factor, because it's something that I bring up all the time. I always say, like, time yourself, because when we put it into perspective, then we realize we're like, oh, I actually wasted so much energy thinking about it. Oh, I'll just do it later. I'll just do it later. And that amount of time and energy spent is actually less than, you know, like the amount of time that is taken to do it. So it might be like only like an hour and a half, and you're just like, wow, like I accomplished so much in that short period of time. And then you're just like, oh, it's really my mind. And so like when I'm coaching my clients and stuff too, like oftentimes I'll just tell them, like, when you put it into a time frame, then you're just like, oh, okay, like, because it's not just about our stuff, right? Like we become really conscious about what you bring into your home, but also your lifestyle, what you put in your body, you know, your thoughts as well. You're just more conscious about like, oh, is this a habit to keep, or something to let go of as well? Like, are these thoughts still serving me too? So then when you're able to just be like, oh, okay, like, like even just something simple. It's like, okay, I see this. Typically you'll be like, okay, I'm gonna just do it later. It's like pause and reframe to just be like, okay, do I have the energy? Do I have 2 minutes? If it takes me less than 2 minutes to do it, just do it.
Right.
And then you're also leaning into the things that actually increase your oxytocin and your endorphins as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
So it's like, it's especially as people who are like HSPs and like empaths, it's like, you're overstimulated really easily. So it's all about these tiny little things. These are like all the life hacks, right? To be like, okay, we can get ourselves back to baseline, or like top ourselves up, charge ourselves up with these tiny little acts. Like even just looking at clutter increases your cortisol levels.
Right.
So
you know what I'm wondering if the flip side is true, because I sometimes when I declutter, or when I go through and I'm not KonMari certified, but I'm so interested in the process, and I've read Marie Kondo's book, and but when I see, for example, like a blank space where there used to be clutter, or like a beautiful like vignette of just a couple things that really spark joy for me, I almost experience like the opposite of the cortisol level. So it must be,
it calms you. It actually calms you. It calms your nervous system.
Yeah, so I feel calmer. And I also, when I'm really like tuned in with myself, I feel gratitude to myself for creating that, for taking the time to do that. And I wonder if it must create sort of a feedback loop that
it does. It absolutely does. And then so we lean into that, right? So then we have to actually make it into a habit. So like when I do like when I work with private clients, or when I do corporate workshops and stuff as well, I'm always telling them like, sometimes we get so stuck, like we get like tunnel vision, like especially when we're on the computer, like, that driven doing mode of mind. And it's like, sometimes like we have to actually step away from it. And when we're doing something with our hands, whether it be like tidying up or decluttering, just 10 minutes of it, it actually calms your nervous system. And it helps you to get your mind into like an alpha state of mind as well, because it calms you. So then that's where like you get those flashes of brilliance. It's like when you take a shower, right? Like you get so calm, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one of my favorite ways to like regulate as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that's something I tell my HSP clients a lot of the time. It's just like, even just water in general, right? Even if it's just running your hands underwater, or splashing your face with water, or if you can hop in a shower bath for 10 minutes, like, it's good for our bodies.
That's like my that's actually like my quiet zone,
Especially with kids.
Especially with kids. And like, so because on your website you actually have the free printables as well, like the 5 tips to manage overstimulation for HSP parents. So like I love how in that, like for anyone who's on this or watching the replay as well, check out the website highlysensitiveparenthood.com, because then you can, sign up and not only get the free printable, but you can also get a discount to your courses, which is for highly sensitive parents and also for raising HSP children, right? Which is so needed. So like, and one of them, I'm not going to give everything away because obviously like go and download it, but one of them was creating quiet zones. And I loved how you wrote that, because there's so many parallels with it, with the KonMari method, because it's when we create those clutter-free zones, we actually call it power spots.
I love that.
So it's like, it literally charges you up, right? Like you have your little corners. So whether it be that corner for like children, or like for me, it's like my shower, or like being in the garden as well, like literally being in that little, like your whole house can be a power spot. But when you have those little zones as well, it really helps you to just regulate and just feel calm. Like it's like our environment can have a direct impact on our nervous system.
Right. And I think especially for parents of young kids, my kids are a little older now. They're just turned 6 and 9.
Yeah.
So I can a little more easily say like, oh, just go tidy up their room, or like, hey, pick this up. But when my kids were little, like babies, toddlers, clutter was just, unfortunately, it was a part of life. Like it would ebb and flow, certainly, but it took a lot of effort to kind of create to make my entire house a power zone, so to speak, right? So that is actually, one of the tips that I give in the worksheet and to my clients as well is find at least one space in your house that you can kind of maintain pretty well. And so for me, when my kids were little, that was my bedroom. And it made sense for me to make it extra soothing. Like I'm actually sitting in it right now because we have a house guest in the guest room, but I painted this beautiful little arch in like a kind of a bluish greenish color, and I have some soft lighting, and it's just a very pleasant place to be. even when, and when I find myself getting overwhelmed, like we had like a big birthday party for family and friends this past weekend. We had 25 people in our 1,200 square foot house.
Yeah.
So it was intense. It was, I don't think I need to explain more than that. It was just intense.
Yeah, exactly. And I get it. I've been there.
And I was thankfully taking my own advice, and my husband knows to kind of check in on me in these moments. And he was like, hey, like, are you doing okay? At the beginning of the party, I was like, I think I'm going to go lay down for like 10 minutes. And there are people already there. And here's another thing that is super big for HSPs and parents, is giving yourself permission. So I gave myself permission to take 10 minutes to come upstairs to my power zone, to my quiet space, to really center myself, to just calm down. And I wasn't even necessarily doing anything really specific. I think I laid down and maybe took some deep breaths with some essential oil, and I read for 10 minutes. Yeah. There are guests in my house, but I knew I was going to be more present, more connected with my kids, less grumpy if I took that time. And I did the same thing on the flip side of the party. And so I think it's one of those things when the HSP people pleaser part comes out, which is true for a lot of HSPs. We can not give ourselves permission to take what we need. And then it ends up backfiring for ourselves, ends up backfiring for other people too. And so it's one of the really, like someone said earlier, it's like easier said than done, like so important to understand, but like hard to actually execute. But I do think that when we have these clutter-free spaces, and when we are practicing, as you mentioned earlier, listening to ourselves and what sparks joy and what doesn't, and practicing saying no, even to like physical, tangible objects, it makes it easier for us to learn how to do that with people, with situations, more kind of complicated things that really serves us well as parents and
absolutely. And I totally agree with you, because I've been doing that a lot as well, because, you know, it's like having nonstop guests over too. And it's just like, you know what, like, not overthinking it, because I think as HSPs and empaths, like you do tend to overthink, like, oh, what do they think of me? I'm so rude. And then there's like the negative self-talk start to creep in. So like when we do it with the KonMari way, because we have to let go with gratitude, that's our whole thing, right? Like the philosophy behind it. So when we're able to reframe it and we're letting go positively, it also helps to rewire our brain as well. So it doesn't become so self-deprecating. You know, like one of the examples I like to give is like, okay, and this comes up a lot, especially with not only female clients, but predominantly female clients. They'll be like, oh, I'm too fat for this. I'm going to let this go. And then I'm like, no, pause. Let's reframe it. It's like, oh, thank you. I now know that this style is not suitable for me. So it just becomes really neutral. And then, so that's where everything changes, right? And, okay, so according to a German study, there is 10,000 items on average in your household, but that's German, sorry. So, and then like I read another report recently, which was apparently UK is like around 300,000 items in a household.
Oh my gosh. I'm sure US is just off the charts.
Yeah, it's like probably really similar as well. But like, imagine if you're asking yourself, like, does this spark joy? Does it spark joy? And you're doing this like, you know, over 100,000 times. It's going to rewire your brain. Like you're going to be looking at things from the lens of gratitude, right? Because you have to be grateful. You're like, okay, I'm choosing things that spark most joy. And it's like, oh, you know what? This doesn't really spark joy anymore. And that's okay. I'm practicing letting go, right? Like, or, oh, that felt really sticky like 6 months ago. I couldn't let that go, but now I'm ready. It's like the emotional readiness.
Right.
So it really changes. Like, you know, so as you practice this more, like, and I see it with my kids because they've been practicing this since they were 2 years old. And then so they're able to, you know, like I was, what I do, like I was watching like the Glastonbury concert on TV with like my eldest. And then I was like, would you like to go to a concert? She's like, no, like, why would you? You know, she's like, the bathroom looks so far. She's like super practical as well. And she's like, why would you, if you're standing in the middle of the crowd, you won't even be able to see the stage. And it's like, you know, too many people. And I was like, cool. You know, like I was like really proud of her that she's able to align herself with what serves her and what lights you up. Because I think, you know, like when we prepare like children, but also like, you know, I work with a lot of elderlies as well, like senior citizens, where they never gave themselves permission to be able to say no to the things that don't serve them, right? And then like, you know, the example that you gave earlier, which is about the like, you know, we get gifts, like that's one of the top questions that comes up all the time, which is, oh, like, you know, we keep things out of guilt. We're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like, you know, this so and so gave this to me, so I should keep this. And it's like, no, like, and Marie Kondo says this as well, which is that when the gift has been exchanged, then the energy exchange is complete. So you become the true owner of the gift.
I love
You can
that.
decide what to do with it. Like the intention and the purpose of the gift has been fulfilled already.
Yeah.
So then, you know, don't keep out of guilt. And like, you know, when you live somewhere where there's like a lot of charity shops and stuff, you can also be grateful. Oh, I'm passing this forward to someone who needs it. I often say, like, you know, keep a gifting box. Like we can also destigmatize the notion of regifting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we don't need so much stuff. Like, and my 5-year-old, I'm not 5-year-old, she's like 7 now. I keep referring to her as 5. You know, it's one of those like pandemic things that let you forget people's ages.
Get stuck.
So she's 7 now, and then she's like, you know, she had her birthday party recently, and then so what we normally do is like, you know, we want to be able to amplify that act. And so what we'll do is we'll actually go through it, we take pictures so that I can thank the people individually via text, and then we went through it again to be like, okay, which ones actually spark joy for you, you know, and then the other ones, then we put it away to donate or to give to people who will enjoy it more. You know, and it's like I think like in the society that we live in today, it's so much about consuming and accumulating. And it's also about you get to define what is enough for you. You know, like if you're a fashionista, then you're going to have a bigger wardrobe than someone who isn't. And that's okay, because we're all about celebrating that uniqueness, right? And you get to, like, when you go through this process, you're a lot more intentional and mindful about what you bring into your home and your life. So, which is why, like, yeah, and it's like, you know, it's not, because it's so easy to get caught up in the marketing narrative, right? Like, you know, especially like places like Western, not only Western countries, everywhere now, like especially in the advent of like online shopping, one click purchase, right? So what we're doing is like, actually, you know what, we can be a lot more slower and intentional, like not just consuming mindlessly. Because I think especially as like HSPs as well, you know, when you're feeling like dysregulated, it's so easy to lean into the maladaptive coping mechanisms. And that might be looking like, oh, you know, binge eating, binge watching. You know, I used to be a shopaholic because I just kept on trying to fill that void. And I think that's also why, like, I love this method so much, because I grew up in a really tidy household. But I realized that, like, when we're looking at it from that view of like scarcity versus, oh, I don't have enough, versus like, oh, I have enough. That shifts your perspective on everything, because then you're just like, oh, you know, I'm content, and contentment leads to happiness.
Wow. I mean, I'm thinking too, as you were talking, I was thinking about how this perspective of being grateful for things that once served you, or once were part of your life, or once were something you loved, and no longer serve that. I mean, my mind goes right to sort of like grief, and a lot of people don't necessarily, and maybe there is some of that comes up with items, but I'm thinking too about, you know, relationships, and I'm sure especially the items that are tied to relationships, right, that have this sentimental value. But it really, I think, teaches a valuable lesson, the KonMari method of saying, you know, thank you, or like, you know, you served your purpose, and now I'm passing you along to, you know, spark joy for someone else. I'm even thinking about that now. This takes a truly evolved person and some work, but, you know, for example, when a relationship ends, a friendship or a you know, partnership, a dating relationship, or a marriage, it can take some time to get there, but the people who are able to do that, or at least find moment of, you know what, I don't need to view this as a failure. I don't need to look at this whole experience of this whole relationship, or this whole parenting thing, even as I've just failed. I need to feel guilty. It's irredeemable, or what, you know, this loss. But can I see at least parts of it as, you know, that taught me something about myself, or that I had so many joyful moments or joyful experiences with that person, that item, that you know, experience, whatever. So it really is, it's a lesson that I see over and over people really benefit from learning. And again, I just love the embodied aspect
Yes.
of doing this. I liked when you mentioned earlier about sort of like the tangible and how that it calms the nervous system, even to sort of like, you know, fold things or
Yeah.
go through, touch things, because it brings in this like sensory that a
Yes.
lot of us, you know, here I am sitting in front of my computer right now, for example, and there's like, the sensory is not, I'm not tuned into that. I'm
Yeah.
tuned into the screen,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, when I'm able to pause and, you know, deal with the laundry
Mm-hmm.
or cooking or, you know,
Yeah.
tidying, there is this like this bodily engagement that I think
Yes.
if we bring intention to it, and if we really are mindful as we're doing
Yeah.
it, it really can teach us a lot about what sparks joy for us,
100%.
what does not spark joy
Mm-hmm.
for us, and just being present too, which is something
Yes.
that a lot of HSP parents and a lot of just people in general um, can struggle with, because when we're overstimulated, when there's a lot going on, when there's things around us that in our schedule
Mm-hmm.
or homes that don't spark
Yeah.
joy, that is such a suck on our
Oh,
energy and
yeah.
our attention.
Totally. And
So,
it's like a mindful activity as well. And we don't get that a lot now where like, you know, it's one of like the very few screen-free activities now. So when I'm
yeah.
teaching parents like how to work with their children as well, I often frame it as like it's this bonding time because you not only get to learn what lights your children up, you
Yeah.
also like, you know, from a practical note, because you know what sparks joy for them, you also save a ton of money too
Yeah.
because you're not just mindlessly purchasing, right? Like, so, you know, when I have parents who are like also, you know, they'll feel overwhelmed by the things that are coming into the house too, then I often say like, you know, the you know, the hard truth is that you are the gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like either you're purchasing it or, you know, other people are purchasing it, but you can actually you know, step into your power to decide what works for your family. You can like kindly tell people that like, oh, you know, you prefer not to have these kinds of gifts, or, you know, make a donation to
Yeah.
charity instead, whatever it is, right? And it just makes it so much easier to control the inflow. So like for families who go through this process, you just become really in tune with what's coming into your house. You also have a full mental audit of everything that you have in your house. So you're not buying repeats,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, you're, it's like, you know, even just practical things like going to the grocery store, but if you don't know what you have in your pantry, then you might end up buying a lot of repeats, and then that turns into food wastage,
Right.
right? So like it's, and then these are the things that will actually, these are the energy drainers. So like
Mm-hmm.
especially as HSPs and like empaths, and we need to be so conscious. It's kind of like that, you know, like if you have that visual of a battery, right? Like it's like the conversations that we have can either charge us up or can sap us. The conversations that we have with ourselves can also do that, right?
So
And
true. Yes.
and like all the activities too. So it's like the our space will be a sanctuary, and then we're able to, because doing the inner work is hard,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure you see it with all of your clients as well, who are like, you know, you're putting in so much effort to do you know, to go to therapy and do all of this like, you know, personal development, like growth, but then if your space isn't supporting you,
Mm-hmm.
then you're already waking up like you have the intention to work out, but you can't even find your workout gear,
Right.
right? Like you open your drawer, it's a mess. So that's already raising your cortisol levels and already depleting your energy. So it's just these tiny little things that are within our control, you know, like because when the world outside isn't making sense, you know, there's
Mm-hmm.
so many things that are out of our control, but this is something that is within our control. And it also is a way to boost our happiness hormones as well.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's, I mean, it's, to me it's like a no-brainer when you're phrasing it like that. It's like, oh my gosh, this has an impact on mental health. It has an
Yeah.
impact on just your day-to-day experience of life.
Yeah.
I know for me, it certainly impacts the way that I'm able to engage with my kids.
Yes.
For example, now this is a little different, but when my we have a house cleaner, thankfully, come
Yeah.
every couple of weeks. I'm very grateful for that. And after, you know, the day or two after that, I'm like, oh, like I don't have all of these things to
Yeah.
do. There's not like, you know, my attention's not going here and there, like, oh, that's dusty, oh, I need to wipe that
Yeah.
down. And I'm able to actually relax and be present with my family
Yeah.
in a way that really is more accessible
Yeah.
than when the house is cluttered. Like, for example, after the party, right? It's just like
Yeah.
there's stuff everywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't fully be relaxed until a lot of that's taken care of. Now that takes me back to like having those zones
Yes.
that are, because sometimes we don't want to get caught in this like situation where we're like, I can't relax until
Yep.
everything looks perfect
Yep.
or feels calm. And sometimes we have to say, you know what? No, like I deserve to take a break, or my family, I want to be there for
Yeah.
my family, or I need to do this other thing. Let me calm this
Yeah.
space, or relocate
Yes.
myself to a calm space. And it could be outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
I also do actually nature-based
Yeah.
therapy in my psychotherapy practice. And so sometimes it's just removing yourself from your home space and, you know,
Oh,
sitting under
totally.
a tree or looking out the window for a minute, resetting and saying, you know what, yes, things are not pristine, but I'm going to choose to be present as I possibly can. And so that's kind of I would say like an exception a little bit, or a nuance to what we're talking
Yeah,
about, is
and I
choosing
totally
that.
agree. It's like, it's also because when you're in tune with your body and what you need, you might be like, okay, you know what, I just need to be outside right now. And because now we live in Edinburgh where we have nature right at our doorsteps as well. And I've lived in cities my whole life, so I never knew like how healing it is until now.
Yeah.
And it's like one of my go-tos. Sometimes I'll just be like, okay, we're just gonna go for like a quick little hike.
Yeah.
And we do that often, like to just break up the day as well, and it just charges you up. And then like, when our space supports us, it's you're not living in a showroom, right? Like a show flat. So if it gets messy, and it will because you have a family, but you have this confidence and knowledge that at the end of the day, everyone pitches in because there is a system in place. Everyone just picks up and like, resets the house together.
Yeah.
So it also becomes a shared responsibility. So it's not all on the mother's shoulders because, traditionally speaking, that's what, it becomes mom's roles, right? And I often work with like very tired, frustrated moms who feel like they have to do everything. And I'm like, no, like actually, by you doing everything, you're taking away the opportunity for the kids to practice. They might not do it perfectly, but through its muscle memory, like if we don't give them the opportunity to practice, and then when we have that system in place, it becomes easier for them to be like, hey, the scissors aren't put back. Can you put it back to where it belongs, And it's like the language matters, right? Like not saying like, oh, why can't you put anything back? Why are you so messy? So then that's also another thing that we work through because we keep the language really neutral. So then it becomes like, people's defense mechanisms don't come up. It doesn't become a negative experience. Yeah. And then so that's where like, then it just becomes part of, it just becomes like natural, like it just becomes easy to do, right? Because it's like, it is a muscle. We do need to work it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's interesting.
I love how it allows for buy-in from children or partners or whoever else you live with too, because I also work with a lot of very overwhelmed, stretched thin moms who who are frustrated, and it can take some real intention to not in practice to not get up. I'm just thinking about this weekend. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and my 9-year-old, he's my highly sensitive kiddo who loves attention. He likes to kind of like engage me in different things. He asks a lot of he asks for help a lot, but he's perfectly capable of doing a lot of these things. And so I really, this weekend, for some reason, I just felt inspired to instead verbally sort of instruct him or remind him, hey, mommy, can you help me with this? And I said, well, how about could you go get the step stool and put that decoration up yourself? And he was like, oh yeah, I can. And he has the energy to do it. He has the motivation to do it. He has the vision in his head. It is a practice for me to say, oh, can you do that?
Yes.
And I've started to do more of the same thing with like household stuff too. Hey, before we have dinner, I want you guys to go tidy up the living room, or tidy up your bedroom. And a lot of the time, once they get used to doing it, it doesn't take them long, and they feel good about doing it themselves.
Absolutely.
Too.
And it's really honing in on that too, right? Like drilling that part in, because like even today, because I'm out with my friend today, like who's visiting. So then I was like, okay, girls, like, okay, so like side story, like my girls, like my eldest has like chicken pox, right? So then they're like at home, like watching a lot of TV and stuff, which I'm fine. It's like, if there's any time to be like binge watching, it's like to distract yourself. And I'm like, it's fine. I was like, but you know what? Like, here's the laundry. Could you guys put it back? And like, just reset the room before you guys start your afternoon viewing. And then at first they're kind of like, you know, and then I was like, and then after they're done, because I was like, hey, I'm going to be gone all day, so I want to make sure that this is done. And after they're done, I was like, yeah, now how good does it feel? Like it feels like a reward, right? Like you're watching now, the room is reset. And then you also do get that boost of dopamine as well from completing a task too.
Yeah.
So then when they're able to lean into like recognize that like, oh, there is that feel good factor, you're not doing it to please me. So I try to make like I try my best to like make sure that they're not doing it in order to please me, because you know the people pleasing tendencies come out around this age as well. So then it's like, no, do it for yourself, right?
Right. And I think too to highlight for them, oh, does it feel good? It reminds me of my older son. I'll have him, to help to tidy the room, and then he'll like smooth out our couch cushions and like arrange them. And I swear he can do it better than I can even. He doesn't do it every time, but I don't ask him to do that. He does it because he has some sense of satisfaction that things look tidy, that it looks beautiful and smooth, and he feels good when I notice it, and he feels good, being in a space that feels like that. And so I think it's training, especially kids, and honestly for me, especially having two boys, I'm like, I want them to learn to grow up and be, if they're with women, I want them to be equal partners in household management. And so this is part of that for me too.
It's a service to society. Like I say this all the time to like my clients and friends with like who are like boy moms as well, I'm like, no, like they need to know how to do all these things, because we need to like break the cycle that this is all on the woman, right? And I love what you said too, because it's like, the dopamine actually comes from the act itself, not from the act actually finishing too. So like when we're able to help them to lean into it, then it just becomes like, there's something that they will crave, right? And then they're able to, it's like sometimes it's okay if like things are messy. It's like, then I'll just be like, okay, like after school, like I'll like have to really restrain myself to not tidy the room, and I'll be like, okay, like how does it make you feel to walk into your room? Like I won't, it's like not being like, oh, like why are you so messy? Why can't you tidy up? Like of course, like that might come out from like time to time, but as a parent, it's also my journey to be able to communicate like positively and effectively, constructively to them as well. And then this is where we can support them, especially for people who has like HSP children too, because it's when we're not cultivating that from a young age, that means that they're going to be like the noise that's surrounding them and in their own minds as well just becomes like too loud for them to be able to cope with. And then other people's opinions and their preferences becomes more important than your own. So yeah, it's like all of these things. And I like, well, one thing I do want to say one more thing is like, since we are talking about kids before we jump off the call as well, is for parents who are exploring this method, then make sure that one of the things to reframe is not to say when you let go of these things then you can get X, Y, and Z. So again, because when the reward is a bigger dopamine hit than the actual act itself, then they'll override the act. So like if then like if you're always like trying to entice kids to declutter and let go of things by telling them that they can, because that's not the point of it, right? Like, so when I work with children, I'll be like, we can get something if we see a gap. We can get something if it's something that needs to be upgraded. So then when we have to be really mindful about this, because then otherwise they won't declutter unless you're buying them something, right? And that's not the point of it. That's not the point. Like actually what we're trying to be doing is like, we're trying to consume less, right? In the same age,
more thoughtful and mindful.
And then they'll be able to recognize like what enough means. And so in KonMari speak, we actually get this. It's called the click point too. So most of the time, like when people see the amount of stuff that they have, then like that mountain, if you've seen the Netflix show, then you'll see that pile, that huge mountain. Then people will be like, wow, I have enough. And so even my 9-year-old, she had this epiphany just a couple months ago. Like when we were joy checking her toys, she was like, I have enough toys.
Wow.
So, and that's beautiful because, it is human nature to want more, right? To desire more. But when we're able to be mindful and to be able to recognize that like we have more than enough, then I don't know. Hopefully this will help them
Oh
in
my
their
God.
future as well.
I absolutely think it will. And thinking about how I am raising my kids and have sort of this like mental health perspective, it just dovetails so perfectly with the work that you do. It's about environmental and tangible, but also it is spiritual and it's relational and it's emotional too. It's just sort of like a little bit more of a visible, tangible side of what I'm.
And I think it goes so well hand in hand, because it's like, you're doing like, you're going to therapy, but then it's also, we got to do the work in between the therapy sessions too. Right. And then that's really what helps you to spearhead your healing journey, so. So thank you so much for joining this talk today, because I know you have a call after this too, so I'm really conscious of the time.
I do. Thank you for being mindful. I was just going to say, and I think the cool thing about, even though we live, many, many time zones apart, I'm in California, west coast of the US, and you're in Scotland. You work virtually too. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So theoretically, you could see me.
Absolutely.
And for coaching, for coaching for HSPs, I see people globally. For therapy, it's just California residents.
Yes.
So people know that. So theoretically, you could work with both of us.
Oh, absolutely. Totally. And I'll drop it into after this live is done, I'll also drop it into the description as well.
That's perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Amy, for the talk today. It's always such a pleasure and always so mind expanding.
Yeah,
it was wonderful
to connect with you again as well. And I hope that everybody gets a lot out of it. If you have any questions or want to connect, you can find me at Highly Sensitive Parenthood on Instagram, and also Inner Nature Therapy on Instagram. And my websites are just the same as that. So
perfect. Thank you so much, Amy. Have an awesome day. And we'll chat soon.
Okay, sounds good. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
For more resources, including our signature Highly Sensitive Parenthood online course, visit highlysensitiveparenthood.com.